Thank you very much for joining us. This evening we are welcoming Anna Bird, who is the CEO of the European Movement. She joined about 2.5 years ago in really the height of the pandemic, and a lot has changed since then, both in the outside world and also within the European Movement. So without much further ado, I'm going to hand over to Anna to give us a little bit more information about what the European Movement is doing and how we could possibly rejoin the European Movement. Anna.
Thanks, Emma. It's lovely to see so many of you this evening here in Bath. I say here in Bath, I'm obviously here in London, but it's nice to be virtually with you. I know that Bath is a home of pro-Europeanism because it's where my pro-Europeanism began, actually. I studied at the University of Bath. I studied European Studies, and it's from Bath I learned all about the European institutions. I went off on my Erasmus year and met some of my closest friends, went off to live in France and Belgium and kind of, I guess that's where it all started and why I'm here today. So it's really lovely to join you. And I'm also very grateful to be invited by Emma. I know that Bath for Europe is has been one of our most active groups, and I know that during the People's Vote era you did huge amounts to campaign for a People's Vote. We're very lucky now to have poached Emma onto the staff team, leading not just Bath's activism but also our activism up and down the country as well. So there's close ties, I think, between the European Movement nationally and Bath for Europe. So it's really nice to be here. I think the brief was to talk just about the European Movement. So to talk about our kind of where we are in our planning and kind of, our strategy to take us back to the EU. So I'm going to do that. I'll try and keep it to sort of 10 minutes or so, so that there's loads of opportunity to talk together and to respond to some of your questions. It's a really good time, I think, to be coming and talking to you because we are in the depths of kind of planning for 23-24 right now. And so I'd really like to hear, as part of our conversation, what you think the European Movement should be doing with our time and our resources over the next year, and how we can support you in your campaigns, how you can support us. So I hope that that's what we'll do. But let me start by kind of just talking through where we've got to in our strategy and where I think we're going. So I'm going to start from the very, very beginning. The European Movement was established in the aftermath of the World War II by Winston Churchill. And so when we talk about our vision, our sort of what we're here to do, I think it's quite important to remind ourselves that the European Movement was here long before we were members of the EU. Our vision has always been of the closest possible ties between the UK and the rest of Europe. And we'll be campaigning for that long after we have returned to the EU too. So our vision is absolutely about close relationships right across the continent. It's not dependent on Brexit or our relationship with the EU. It's there kind of it's a bigger vision, I think, of our shared values and our shared prosperity and peace across the continent. But of course, our long-term mission right now is to rejoin the EU. And I think over the past couple of years, while I've been at the European Movement, we have worked really hard to establish clarity about right across the movement that we are here to rejoin. That is absolutely what we're here to do. That's our mission. We're proud to be for rejoin, and we believe that our rightful place is at the heart of the EU. That's what our members believe. And it's clear to me, and I think it's clear to all of us, that we are the only organisation that can credibly lead the campaign home. It's very clear that politicians are not going to lead the way. It's not going to be politicians who take us back into the EU. They are lagging way behind public opinion in relation to rejoin. And I think the European Movement is unique in its historic platform. So yes, we have Winston Churchill behind us. We have the authenticity of being the organisation that has always been here to promote our European values. But we also have that relationship with European Movement International, which means we have kind of, links right across the continent to make that case for European cooperation. So that's really important to us. And I think it gives us a rightful role to campaign to return. The European Movement is also cross-party, and I think that sets us out from other campaigns trying to do similar things. And so I think in time we will become the natural broker of consensus around how we return to the EU, and that's really important to us, that we retain that cross-party status. And then finally, I think what's most important to me, and I'm sure you as kind of grassroots campaigners, is that, you know, our authenticity, our impact is all derived from the fact that we are people powered. So it is our campaigners up and down the country that make us strong. We have kind of 200,000 people campaigning with us, 100 local groups, 17,000 members. That is what gives us the power to do what we need to do. And all of that, I think, is the work that we have been sort of, you know, we've been working to consolidate over the past 2 years in rebuilding the European movement after the collapse of People's Vote and after we left the EU. We have been rebuilding our membership, our staff team, our political leadership, cross-party, to set us in good stead. And we have established a strategy to take us back. So yes, we're unapologetically a pro-European, pro-rejoin campaign. We are equally in our strategy clear that it will be a step-by-step campaign to rejoin the EU. We are not in a place right now where the political conditions are right to campaign to rejoin tomorrow. We've got to create the political conditions, and so that will take some time. And the National Council of the European Movement set out a 4-step strategy. Those are the 4 steps we need to kind of establish on the route back to rejoin. And so I'll talk through them in brief, and perhaps we'll come back to them in the conversation. So first of all, I think we need to make immediate changes to the current Brexit deal. Even within the pathetic parameters of Boris Johnson's deal, there are things that we could change that reduce some of the harm of this Brexit. So we could rejoin Erasmus. It was on the table. The EU were happy for us to be part of Erasmus. We could rejoin the Horizon programme to give scientists a better deal. We could create a better deal for touring artists and cultural industries. We could have mutual recognition of professional qualifications. We could improve the deal for farmers. We could have a common defence and security pact. Those things we could do now, and we should be campaigning, and we are campaigning to improve those things, even though those changes won't ever go far enough. We also, I guess, the second step in the journey towards rejoin, a much bigger step and more important, I think, along the way, is that fundamentally we can't be as prosperous as we were without re-entering EU markets. We need a much more significant trade deal with the EU, and so we have to reopen that conversation about single market and customs union if we're to if as one of the steps to building back. The third step is about a positive vision for rejoining the EU. So I think it's fair to say that we're starting to see the media talking about the fact that Brexit isn't working, the harm that Brexit has caused, but nowhere in the media discourse and nowhere in political discourse does there seem to be any discussion of rejoin as a feasible option. So we need to create that kind of new conversation about rejoining, make it, you know, set out a vision for the UK as part of the EU. Why should we rejoin? Because of our shared values, because being part of the EU is about our common defence and security, it's about peace, it's about prosperity, all of those things. And the fourth step along the way is about building bridges, so building back the trust that we've lost with the EU, establishing the political advocates here in the UK, creating the relationships we need that will eventually kind of bring us back. So where are we now? Over the past year or so, as well as kind of rebuilding the organisation, growing our membership, improving our governance, establishing kind of, you know, the staff team and rebuilding, I think, our trust with the groups, all of that important internal work, We have also been campaigning hard to get the message out that Brexit isn't working, really trying to hammer home the message that Brexit isn't working. And I think given the context of Boris Johnson's lies, we've also been kind of making very clear that the lies at the heart of this government are lies that started with Brexit, and there are lies at the heart of the Brexit deal. And those campaigns have seen us run action days. We've been campaigning nationally on social media and through the press to kind of hammer home that message that Brexit isn't working. Brexit was founded on lies. And we have been doing some campaigning on those specific issues like Erasmus and Horizon. And you can see in the polls that this is starting to make a difference. You do see now a majority who believe that Brexit isn't working, that Brexit has made us poorer, that Brexit has caused the UK harm. And we're also starting to see in the polls, I think, that there is actually in quite a lot of polls a majority for rejoin, but we have to be a bit cautious with the rejoin numbers, I think, because while we do see the numbers going in the right direction, fantastic trend towards rejoin, there's also a significant number who would still say they don't know. And I think we also are aware that those who want to rejoin, there's not a consensus yet about when, how quickly, in what way. So I think while we're starting to see some movement towards rejoin, we've got work to do to create a plausible rejoin solution, and that's what we need to do. So what's the European movement going to be doing over the year ahead? We are in a kind of long general election campaign, I think. And so we've been talking about what the best use for our campaign's time is in the run up to the general election. And as a team, I think we think that there are 3 things we should be doing over the next year. So the first is we absolutely need to get out there and campaign around a single market access. We need to start talking about the impact, particularly on small businesses up and down the country, of being outside of the single market and customs union. And we'd like to do that through campaigns right at the grassroots and through our political campaigns. But the second really important thing we need to do is about starting to communicate effectively around rejoin. So what we know is that as I said, kind of the media is not putting rejoin on the table. There is no conversation about what rejoin as an option. We need to describe what that would look like. But we also know that when we as a pro-European movement talk about rejoin, actually it tends to put people off. So for whatever reason, our campaigns don't really resonate with people. They don't necessarily bring new people into the fold. So we need to find ways of talking about pro-Europeanism that draw new people towards us and that attract support. And the third thing that we really need to do over the next year, I think, is to prepare for the next government. And that means building our political relationships inside government. I want to see the European movement after the election having a really strong dialogue with the next government and parties of all persuasions to be influencing inside the tent as well as campaigning outside of the tent. So we will be engaging with all the political parties and investing, I think, quite significantly in building our political relationships over the next year. And in doing so, the European movement kind of has 3 organisational objectives. We've got to grow our profile in the media, and I'm sure that will come out in some of what you want to say to me, but absolutely we need to get out there and be talking about what we believe all the time. So we're going to be investing in our media presence. We've got to grow our base, because if we want to shift opinion, we have to have more people campaigning with us. So we're going to be working really hard to recruit new people to our movement. And as I said, we're going to be growing our political engagement inside Westminster. There are 3 ways that you can help as Bath for Europe, and I hope that you will campaign with us. The first is, as I said, we want to grow our base. So I'd love to hear how you think you might be able to recruit new people to our campaign. And I suppose it would be really nice to hear in some of the comments what holds you back, because I know that it's been quite difficult to recruit new people at the grassroots. It'd be good to hear kind of what works and what doesn't. The second thing is Emma and her team have been building a really exciting campaign around market access, around our single market campaign, and we think there's a real opportunity for local groups to be going out there and engaging with local business, engaging with your local general election candidates about the impact on local business of not being in the single market. And so we hope that you'll campaign with us on that. And we're about to launch a campaign. I think there will be a campaign launch event on the 15th of March that that you can join to hear more about that. And the third is about using our messaging. So we want to be going out to talk about rejoining the EU over the next year. But as I said, at the moment, our campaigns aren't necessarily attracting new support. So we need to be using messaging that we know resonates with people. And as we develop new campaigns messaging, I hope that Bath for Europe will kind of work with us to get that message out as strongly as possible. So that's a kind of rip-roaring canter through our plan. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I hope that we can dig into some of the politics a bit in the conversations we now have. Over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Anna. I think that was really comprehensive and really interesting. So a few questions have come up. If what Anna has been speaking about sort of makes you question anything, or if there's any sort of comment or contribution you'd like to make, just drop it in the chat and we'll try and go through it. So we've had a couple of questions which are more sort of slightly on the technical side, but we'll start with those. So Anna, do you think we will be accepted as a candidate country to rejoin the EU, with some parliamentary parties being in favour, or do you think we will need most or all parties to be in favour?
Yeah, so I think that we've talked about this a bit in terms of our strategy, and I think that the view of the European movement is that we won't be ready to rejoin until there is a stable majority in favour of rejoin in the public, but also cross-party support for that position. I think that if it looks to the EU that there will be a swing, depending on which party's in power, we could swing back the other way. There is no way that that the EU would want to take a risk on bringing us back in. So I do think that there are conditions we will need to meet. One is a stable majority of the public in favour, but certainly I think cross-party support is part of that too.
Which obviously is what the European movement is all about.
That's what we're all about, yeah. But I would also say, and Molly, our interim chair, has been very clear about this, that every time you hear, when you do hear a discussion about rejoining in the press, almost immediately the comment comes back, but they'll never take us back, and that isn't strictly true either. So I think we, in our dialogue with member states, and I think the European movement is very well set up to start having some of that dialogue with kind of political parties across the EU. As we talk to them, I think it's quite important to evidence that that's not actually true, that there are kind of advocates right across the EU who do want us back. Obviously they need to see willing on our side too, but it is in the interest of the EU too, I think.
So that segues beautifully into another question from Mark Baines. Would France possibly oppose us rejoining? And if we did rejoin, would we have to join, for example, the Eurozone or Schengen?
They are big questions, and I don't know that I can answer them, but I think maybe the answer to that is we don't know yet. But we need to be having the dialogue. And as I said, I do think that we're quite well placed to do that. So within the European movement, we've got a big sort of support base of ex-MEPs and sort of people who have diplomatic relationships right across the EU. And I think we need to be getting out, sending out our ambassadors to start having those conversations in France and Germany, right across the EU, to understand how people do feel and to bring that intelligence back to shape our campaigns.
Great. So Alan Yearsley is asking, do you think we will need political reforms such as proportional representation or proper devolution or a codified constitution in order for the EU to take us back?
So, I guess the same answer applies as before. I don't know. Certainly, I think there is a feeling within the European movement that we're unlikely to, proportional representation is likely to be one of the things that we need to secure along the way. It certainly would help us to get the majority we need. And it's not, I don't think, for the European movement to campaign on that issue. There are campaigns, Make Votes Matter and others who are doing brilliant campaigns for proportional representation. But I think we do recognise that that is a step along the way.
Okay, great. From Philip Janssen, the most important blocker at the moment is Keir Starmer with his Make Brexit Work message. Obviously, this is Philip's view. How do we get around that, and what are we doing? What is the European movement doing to persuade Labour that rejoining is a good idea?
Yeah, so I totally share the frustration that Labour isn't going anywhere near far enough, and it has, I think it has the political space actually to go much further than it is at the moment. However, I'm not sure that I completely share the view that our biggest blocker is Keir Starmer, because I think the biggest blocker is probably those horrible Brexiters in the current government who have created this deal. But anyway, I mean, listen, I totally hear the point, and I do think that we are going to have to work very closely with Labour in opposition and probably in government if they are, if the polls are to be believed, to shift their opinion. I think that while we will always call Labour out for not going far enough, I think we also need to work with the party as they are. They're clear that they will focus first on getting elected and then start to shift their relationship with the EU. There's no point in screaming at them. I think we need to work with them and push them further and continue to push them to go further. At the moment, all they're looking at is those first immediate steps. I think they've got much more space to be starting to talk about our trade relationship, and that's where we need to put the pressure on. And I think our view is that while nationally we're unlikely to see much shift in Labour or any of the other political parties in the next year ahead of the general election, I actually think we can do some great work at a local level. So local groups can be doing some great work to engage with your local candidates and to start to identify some really strong pro-EU voices who can push this forward much more in the next Parliament.
And that's what we're hoping some of the market access campaign would sort of dovetail into,
Absolutely.
possibly. So more details on that coming in the next month or so. But yeah. Peter Streams, apologies if I haven't pronounced that correctly. Do you see any dangers in the approach you outlined that by pushing single market and customs union membership before full EU membership, that for many British people that would be enough, and we would be left permanently in a Norway situation?
It's tricky, isn't it? And I think we need to be quite careful as the European movement. So the National Council is clear that single market and customs union membership is probably one of the steps towards rejoining. But I don't think the European movement ever wants to be a campaign to rejoin the single market and customs union, full stop. We want to be campaigning to have that debate, to shift the barriers to rejoining. And at the point where it's a possibility that we could rejoin, the European movement is going to be campaigning to rejoin the European Union, let's be clear. So I think we want to create the space, create the appetite, the understanding that we would be better off in the single market. But I don't think we want to advocate just for rejoining the single market. So, as we create that political space, we'll be moving on to the next thing, which is absolutely talking about rejoin.
So sort of leading on from that, Andrew Ockwell is asking, is there a single market light option which would be compatible with Labour's current position?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite likely actually that that Labour might even start to talk up rejoining the customs union this side of an election. That is possible. And so there probably is a kind of better trade relationship out there that doesn't involve complete alignment with the single market. But as I say, it's only a step for us towards the kind of the real deal, which is proper engagement politically as well as economically with the European Union. So, yeah.
From Joe Pettifer, what do you think it would take for more MPs to speak out about the problems of Brexit or in favour of rejoin?
Yeah, so We went to all the party conferences this year, and so we had a lot of political engagement across all the parties, and it was quite interesting what we heard back. And I think across all the parties, but certainly with Labour, I think there was feedback that they're damned if they do and damned if they don't. If they do sort of start to indicate some moves towards closer relationship with the EU, we scream at them because they're not going far enough. And if they do, so I think so the feedback we got was that we need to engage positively and constructively with the political parties, and kind of start from where they are. So I do think that we need to kind of have a constructive discussion, and I think that's been difficult in some places. I think that politicians will only speak out when they know that their constituents, when the public want us to. So as I said, I think that politicians will always lag behind public opinion. So the more we can demonstrate that the public knows that Brexit was a mistake and recognises that, all the issues, whether it's kind of, I said I wouldn't talk about this, but a lack of tomatoes on our supermarket shelves, or whatever it is, that we know that that's a Brexit issue, and they know we know. I think that we need to give them the space to speak out and to talk about Brexit. So it's our job really to give them the cover, and to demonstrate the public opinions ahead of them, and that's when they'll walk into the space, I think.
Ian Bartle asks, would rejoining depend on the collapse of the Conservative Party as it now stands?
Well, I think we're seeing the death spiral of the Conservative Party as it is now. And so I don't know, let's see. Well, I don't know. I think that what I'm starting to see in the conversations I'm having with kind of pro-European Conservatives is there's quite a lot of energy, I think, behind some of those pro-EU Conservatives who have been left out in the cold for a long time. And I hope that, we'll see. But if they do lose at the next general election, I think the rebuilding of the Conservative Party, or whatever happens next, will give space to pro-European Conservatives to kind of find a platform again. And I do think we need that. So I think if we are to create a cross-party movement towards rejoining, we need those advocates on the right of the political spectrum. So I hope that we do see a kind of proper realignment in the Conservative Party, but I'm not hoping for its destruction, because I think we do need those Conservative voices somewhere in the mix.
Fair enough. We've got actually a question from one of our own team. So could European movement help grassroots campaigners by generating some pro-single market literature to use as part of the campaign? This would be so useful and would help with interactions with local businesses. Do you want to answer that one?
I think you should answer that one, Emma. Go on.
The short answer is yes, we are working on that right now. So as Anna mentioned, we are in the sort of end of pulling together a market access campaign. I notice actually Steve Rouse has joined. So Steve from Swindon for Europe, just down the road, we do quite a lot of joint events with them. Did a business survey at the end of last year, which was really successful, and got loads of interesting data and information from that, made great links with local politicians. So we're really trying to build on the work that people like Steve did, also a group in Wandsworth in London, and trying to sort of expand that and support groups to do similar things. So yes, that will definitely include materials and things that can help sort of hopefully build some bridges with local businesses. But yes, it'll be introduced to groups in the next week, and as Anna said, we're planning a webinar to do a sort of big briefing in mid-March. So I absolutely hope that anyone from groups here who's interested in building some relationships with their local businesses will get involved. Absolutely. Great. Kenneth Brown, you clearly need to get news coverage for pro-EU issues. What steps can be taken to influence the press, television and social media to adopt a more pro-rejoin agenda?
Oof. That's a big question.
Entire press strategy, yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, what we do absolutely need to get more profile for the EM, and we need to get more profile for pro-rejoin issues. How do we do that? I mean, partly there is some really boring stuff we need to do, like we need to recruit a really brilliant press person who can lead that work through. And the reality is that if you want to get stories out, you have to hammer the media all the time, send out press releases, have something to give, have kind of regular polling, so some of that is just, we've had to build our finances to be able to afford to do that. We need to recruit the right person, and that's what we're going to be doing this year. So that stuff we can do. It's just a matter of kind of getting our resources in order, and we're doing that. I think there's a harder question, which is even with press capacity, it is true that what the press want from us is when the press comes to the European movement for a comment, it tends to be Talk TV, GB News, kind of the sort of really sort of far right press, and they're looking for us as the kind of contrarian view, the sort of polar opposite of their audiences. It's like, and they want a shrill kind of pro-rejoin comment. They don't really want us to be saying it's going to take some time. They don't want us to be moderate and and thoughtful and reflecting kind of sort of the political situation and realistic about where we are. So I think we do need to think about how we promote a realistic, feasible route to rejoin and where we want to put that comment. I think what will help us is our political leadership. So we're really lucky to have appointed over the past year 2 new vice presidents in Caroline Lucas and Vince Cable. We want to, make sure that they are given ample time and space as our spokespeople to talk about, and I think they will draw the media's attention in a way that perhaps I or others in the European movement won't. So we can do that. And I think the more we can sort of develop our own polling and other things, the more we can get out into the media. But it is an uphill struggle, and I think some of what we can do most effectively is start to influence local press. I think, and again, that's why in the campaign plans this year we want to be talking about the Single Market and Customs Union in relation to local business and getting that out into local press, because I think we can start to tell those stories about local impact probably more effectively than in the national media at the moment. So you can really help us.
Absolutely. Question that's linked as promotion for the group. Are you in contact with James O'Brien of LBC?
Well, that's a good question. So personally, I'm not in conversation with James O'Brien, but I think we have. I feel like we have Emma help. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I think
I can't remember. Probably not since I was there, but it's definitely something that's worth poking.
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely. And he has shared our stuff on social media before, and we always share his. But I just have a feeling that there was some contact recently. But yeah, I mean, he is a great advocate for us, and I think, we should be sort of trying to build that relationship. And there are others. I mean, clearly, the rest is politics, and others who kind of continually push pro-European agendas. There's a real opportunity for partnership there, the New European and others. So yeah, they're on our radar.
So another question from David Powell. It's quite a long question, so I'm just going to sort of synthesize it a little bit. So I think what he's asking is number of supporters of a movement is great, but obviously a lot of politics works through business influencers, media, and sort of political elites is how David is expressing it. So are we aiming to win support, or are these sort of high-level influencers also important, and how are we working with them, basically?
Yeah, and ever since I joined the European movement, I have to say that it is an extremely well networked organisation with some incredible links right to the top of kind of business and politics, and we are fortunate to have that influence. But I think there's much more that we can do, and I think we do in particular need to build our relationships with kind of big business leaders who have been slightly reticent to speak out about the impact on their on their businesses, but we know it's there, and we know that increasingly they will be wanting to speak out. So I think sort of thinking about how we use our networks and our political leadership to build those relationships is something we need to do, definitely, over the year ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the sort of coming back again to the market access campaign, the idea of that is, if we can make it work, to sort of have that pressure from the grassroots upwards. So that's why engaging with like local chambers of commerce or local businesses that are possibly part of these national networks, to try and encourage them to start speaking out and hopefully push that upwards, so that it can encourage the national elements of those to start taking it seriously as well. So that's the theory, at least. So until we actually get this out into the world,
I think that's right. And I think, like politicians are never going to lead the way. I think the big business leaders are always going to lag a bit behind and kind of be reticent to kind of use their position unless they feel that they've got a movement behind them. So I think that small businesses kind of can be a bit more outspoken, perhaps, can kind of lead the way here. It is the movement that will take us back. And I think big business will come out if they feel that there is a space for them to start talking about these issues, just like politicians will. We've got to create that space.
Great. Moving on to a different topic. What chances are there for funding of the Rejoin campaign similar to the way the Tories get funding from private individuals? Well, it's sort of linked to
that. Well, I think this is an interesting one. Our European movements funding is all from private individuals, but in small amounts. So, all of our income, 70% of it comes from membership fees, and about 30% from crowdfunding, the kind of people chipping in £3, £5 here and there for a campaign. And it's brilliant because it keeps us completely free to say exactly what we want. We're not beholden to any big funder. We're not required to kind of meet particular kind of grant requirements. We are free and the voice of our movement. But I do think that if we are, at the point where we start to build a kind of mass mobilization towards Rejoin, we're going to need a different scale of funding. And I think that will require, sort of private individuals to dig deep into their big trouser pockets. And I think it will come, but I do think we probably could benefit from some high value donations. So if you know anyone rich, can you just have a word? We do need to start tapping up those people who might be able to help. But yeah, it is difficult. I think that lots of money was raised during people's vote, and we don't see the same kind of appetite. There isn't the urgency, I think, perhaps behind the campaign right now. So we need to create that, and we do have intention to kind of start to build that back this year as well. But I think we need a bit of help with it.
Absolutely. So yes, any contacts that anyone might have would be gratefully received. Michael Watson, linked to this, is sure that the EU itself would help with funding. It's just a case of finding the right people. Are we speaking directly to people in the EU about our cause?
So we are. We haven't sought EU funding recently, and I think we have to be a little bit careful of that. I'm not sure how it would go down in the UK to be seen to be in the pocket of the EU, and so we need to think a little bit about positioning there. It kind of would open us up as a bit of a target, but actually, the European Movement International gets quite a lot of funding from EU sources, and we're talking to them. They've got some money through. They're working with the British Council, and we're going to be working with them on a project to improve dialogue between the UK and the EU, do some polling and understand kind of what messages work to promote pro-Europeanism. So there are ways that we can do it, and we have looked a bit at it. I think the reality is also that EU funding, it's quite bureaucratic to get there. So we'd need to invest if we were going to do lots of grant funding requests. I'm not sure it's the best way for us to go, but there are ways to promote that a little bit through EMI and others.
So sort of linked to that, Ruth is asking, does the European movement work with the Council of Europe in any capacity?
So our previous chair, Andrew Adonis, was on the Council of Europe. I think he was a representative. And so we aren't working directly with the Council of Europe. We don't have any current kind of engagement, but there's no reason why we couldn't. And I think there's a route to engagement there, definitely.
Okay. Is EMI through linked to the Council of Europe at all? EM International? I can't remember.
I think so.
It might be, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, Kenneth asks, do we have a core group of powerful speakers who can put forward to represent our views to trade bodies, trade unions, or local pressure groups?
We do, and we're building it. So, the intention in appointing new vice presidents was to kind of create that leadership, a set of ambassadors. And I think beyond our vice presidents, Caroline Lucas, Vince Cable, but also obviously Michael Heseltine, our president, and others. There are a kind of range of ambassadors, people like Dominic Grieve and David Gauke, Stella Creasy, who spoke on behalf of the European movement and kind of are our sort of wider ambassador network. And I think, that is the group of people who can go out and build relationships more widely in Westminster, but also with businesses and others. So yeah, absolutely.
Great. Another Anna Berrier is asking, so the forces that worked for 2 decades spearheaded by UKIP to get Britain out of the EU have not gone away and have not changed their tune. They're still appealing to nationalist sentiments, pushing exceptionalism and a very limited notion of sovereignty. Remain was unable to counter their narrative during the referendum. What has changed?
Well, I think you're right to say that they haven't gone away, and I think that we need to remember that. So, as I said, when we look at the polls and we can start to see kind of support for rejoin is increasing, we need to just be careful, because we're now at the point where the number in favour of EU membership is similar to that at the beginning of the referendum campaign. And we saw what happened during the referendum campaign. UKIP brought out the big guns, leave EU, and we lost. So I do think we need to be careful. And I absolutely agree. We need to be really aware of the power of the opposition. What has changed? Well, I think that we recognise in the European movement that we've got to get properly canny about our messaging, and we can't just talk to ourselves, and we can't just talk about our campaigns in the terms that feel good to us. So the European movement has been investing really heavily in polling and testing our messages, and that is the plan for the year ahead. So as I said, we know that some of the pro-European campaigns we and others have run have not really resonated with the public. People who would have voted Remain and did vote Remain would still not want to be part of the kinds of campaigns we run, and that's pretty sobering. So if we want to kind of get more people involved and we want to shift opinion, then we have to promote messages that really resonate. And what we found when we did some message testing before we went to party conference is that if we talk about the fact that we feel that, Brexit has, the fact that we fear that we have lost direction as a country, that we are sort of losing our way, that that actually there's something fundamentally in the soul of the country that's at stake here. Those are messages that resonate not just with Remain voters, but also with Leavers and Tory voters. And so we've been talking up the campaign as a battle for the soul of our country because we know that resonates with people beyond our base. We've been promoting a kind of more patriotic view, as we love our country and we want to see our country prosper here, but also right across the EU. All of that is important because it resonates and it speaks to a slightly different audience. So if you start to see us looking a bit kind of sober and patriotic and starting to talk about battle for the soul of the country, that's because it works. We're testing those messages, and I hope that you'll kind of adopt some of that too. And it'd be interesting to hear how we could help you to kind of start to take on those messages, what you need to kind of adopt them, because that is the kind of focus on what resonates, the value, you know, tapping into the values that the public has, that I think will take on the machine.
Well, that segues beautifully into the next comment. This is more a comment from Jay Mandel. So he's talking about his personal experience. And he said 2 things that would help would be some teaching sessions on communicating with members of the public, especially those that disagree, and on how we can counter disinformation in face-to-face interactions, for example, on street stalls. So he's talking about training on how to correspond with local media. So in Jay's experience, what he's found challenging is countering a claim made by someone who disagrees with you when I may not have the facts immediately available to refute it. This is really happens on streets. So when you're actually face to face, I mean, it's easy to do on social media. You can do a quick Google, but when they're actually right in front of you, it's very, very hard to do. So Jay says, I've had some of my letters printed in the local newspaper, which is great.
Brilliant.
He lives in a place which voted 71% to leave, but even here I found the letters page to be an indicator of how opinion is shifting. I'd want to be able to write briefer, more impactful letters which have more probability of being published. As you can tell from the length of this comment, brevity isn't my strong point. Thank you, Jay. That's really, really interesting.
That's brilliant. And actually, we definitely want to be providing a whole range of support to groups, which includes training. And so we've done some, I think, some training on community organising, some training on deep canvassing approaches, some conversation about how to kind of, you know, I guess it's all about creating, we talk about it, you know, as the kind of creating the ladder for people to climb down. If people voted leave, kind of, you don't tell them they were wrong. You don't tell them they're wrong in their views. You kind of, you know, you have to start to sort of slowly give them routes out and to find common ground. And that's not easy, absolutely. And so if we can, I think you're right. I think we need to provide all sorts of training and support to people to kind of have those conversations. It's in the plan, isn't it, Emma? We've got some budgets put towards it. We're gonna do that, but I think we need to I would like to see a really aggressive rollout of that training, so we kind of train some people who can then train more and more, because, you know, it's not just a one-off. I think we need to get all our boots on the ground trained up to be able to have those conversations. We won't win without it.
No, definitely not. So Ian is asking, he's still not clear in practical terms how powerful speakers or others can engage with local groups. So just having a speaker event like this probably wouldn't attract people sort of from outside the bubble. So, I mean, having spokespeople at a national level that you can wheel out onto question time or whatever, that's one thing, but how could that work at a local group level? I don't have the answer to that right now.
That's interesting. So I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I think that we can put sort of political speakers and others at your disposal, but I think it is for local groups to think about ways to engage beyond your base and beyond your bubble. So, you know, and what we're talking about in terms of engaging with local business, how to kind of perhaps set an event up that's organised jointly or kind of actually seen to be set up by local chambers of commerce or a business network or something else, so that it attracts a slightly different group of people. You might be able to provide a little bit of funding or, you know, set the thing up, but actually the speakers, you're not visible in that equation, and you start to reach some different people. Sometimes it is about us not taking the glory but being behind the scenes, making things happen. Yeah, I don't know is the answer, but I do think we have to work really hard at it, and I think we're going to have to do things that we're not used to doing. So I know kind of it's not street stalls and other things, but we need to start thinking creatively about how to kind of start engaging in different ways in our community, to start talking to new people.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, change of topic. Andrew Hesselden would love to hear the European movement talking more about freedom of movement and what it means for British people. What can EM do to lead the conversation instead of allowing freedom of movement to be couched only in terms of immigration rather than emigration, mobility, opportunity, all those nice buzzwords?
It is so important, and we've been talking about what we need to do if we're going to start to try and engage on the issue of our trading relationship with Europe. And almost immediately you start to talk about single market, the issue of freedom of movement comes up. So I think one of the things we will be doing is testing sort of different public opinion in relation to freedom of movement, and trying to understand how to shift opinion on that particular thing. So we know, for example, in some polling we did before party conference, that the majority of the public kind of are slightly sort of negative in relation to freedom of movement. But actually, if you start to describe that, you know, freedom of movement allows us to be able to see our GP quicker, or kind of have, you know, kind of more, you know, it's about skilled workers in our economy actually, and so it's about the NHS, it's about your GP, it's about your social care. You start to be able to see a shift. So people are more pro freedom of movement if it affects their NHS use, for example. That was a terrible way of describing what we did, but anyway, so I think we will be testing kind of those arguments and how to shift people's opinion in relation to freedom of movement. And as we do that, we will share that with you so that you can take that out into your conversations in the community.
Yeah, I think there's an awful lot of work going on behind the scenes about message testing and making sure that we're targeting the right language to the right audiences. It's a big piece of work that needs to be done quite slowly but properly, and really sort of intensely, to make sure that some of these messages really land, and particularly freedom of movement is a hard one to get right, because it's very easy to slip into some not very pleasant areas of conversation. So sort of two questions that sort of come together. One from Ian, talking about his experiences at our street stall a couple of weeks ago, saying that he spoke to a lady who said that she voted Leave but had changed her mind because of the impact on younger members of her family. She admitted she knew little about the EU in 2016. Is there any way of drawing on this? And similarly, Ruth is asking, do you plan to focus attention on younger people, both those who are already eligible to vote, but also younger teenagers? They're the ones who are really disadvantaged by the UK no longer being in the EU, lack of freedom of movement, studying abroad, all that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, so at a very small level, I think those stories about people who have changed their mind give us all hope, and actually they're kind of what keeps us going. And I had a conversation at party conference with a Tory MP actually, who said that he and his constituents have voted to leave, and that he would vote differently. You know, just keep doing what you're doing, because actually give 5 years, you know, Tories are heading for a brick wall, and actually clearly you were right. And, you know, and if there were another referendum tomorrow, I'd probably vote differently. And that was fascinating. And I think actually some of what do you do with that? I think you just keep repeating those stories, because people need to hear them, and it gives us all hope. And, you know, you pass that on, and it gives someone else perhaps the courage to say, yeah, do you know what? I was the same and I voted. And so I think part of it is just about repeating those stories, sharing that wherever you can. But in terms of kind of the sort of wider point and young people, yes, we are also kind of clear that kind of young people are really important in this, because it is people of a younger generation who are missing out on the opportunities that were my birthright, and I'm sure many on this call's birthright. So the European movement is investing to support the young European movement to grow from, you know, it's really in its infancy as an organisation, but we're kind of paying for a staff member and some funding for it to kind of grow as a movement in its own right. And I think it's right that the Young European Movement lead some really powerful campaigns and be the voice of young people in this, particularly around issues like Erasmus and other things where, you know, it is them that are feeling the pain. So yeah, it's vital that we grow the movement. And I would just say as well, it's we did some membership census work this year to see who our members were, and the average age of a European movement member is 73. So we do have some work to do to tap into a younger audience, which is why we think the route to do that is through nurturing the young European movement, who are an authentic voice of young people rather than ourselves.
Great. Question from Mark Baines. Oh, it just jumped. So regret is a long way from wanting to rejoin. How do we bridge that gap?
Yeah, it is. So I think there are three metrics we're looking at, and I haven't talked about the third very much, but so one is kind of that Brexit was harmful, and regret, as you say. The next is kind of, wanting to rejoin. The third, which I actually think is the most important for us at the moment, is the importance people put as a political issue to our membership of the European Union or Brexit. So we are seeing a majority believing that Brexit was a mistake. We're starting to see an increasing towards a majority for rejoining. But actually, if you ask people what's most important politically, Brexit doesn't even feature in the top 10. It's the NHS, it's the economy, it's things relating to their own lives. So what do we need to do to convince people to move from regretting to being pro-rejoin? I think we need to make it relevant to people's lives. I think we need to make it kind of, feel like our relationship with Europe is the solution to their problems and to the wider political problems. So I think it is demonstrating that, actually leaving the European Union has harmed the NHS. It has damaged our economy. It's those kind of demonstrations of what we've lost. But I think over time, it's also about making a really personal kind of connection between people's own freedoms and beliefs and what being part of the European Union can do. That's a long-term piece of work, but I think that's how we'll do it.
Great. I just saw a quick message come up. Did Anna mention that ideas and things that work would be welcome during this meeting? Yes, please share if you've got any ideas that worked, or if there's anything that you really hope that the European movement could help with, then definitely drop those in the chat, and we'd love to hear it. So Jay is back again asking about the European Movement website, saying that he has found the excellent UK and a Changing Europe website, which has a huge amount of information on it. But if the European Movement website contained a similar amount of facts and analysis, he would be encouraging his friends to be signing up in order to access it. So how can the European movement compete with the UK and a Changing Europe for the quantity of facts and information on the website?
So, well, we can definitely improve our website. That I will bank. And there has been work done this year to improve it. I don't know whether any of you have done a before and after over the past year, but it was much worse. I'll say that. So we're getting there. But I think we also need to be really clear about what the European movement is and isn't. So we're not a think tank, and we are not churning out research papers and information all the time. We're a campaign. I think our movement website should be really clear on the case, the reason why we're campaigning, what we're trying to achieve, why you should be part of it, what difference you can make, how you can join in and get involved right now. Those things should be really clear on our website, and we should be drawing people to the website, because that will tell them how to get involved. As a campaign, I think that's what the website should be doing. We've started to kind of improve the campaign pages of the website. We've started to get more news on our website. There's a way to go, yeah, I'd say. But what we're not going to do is rival UK and Changing Europe, because we do something quite different from them. But I do think we can cross-reference, signpost to all those amazing sources of information, so that maybe people come to the European movement first and then know where they can go to get more detail and more research.
Yeah. We've also recently added what we're calling the Brexit briefings. So these actually came out of some briefings for our volunteers that were going to be, or that did volunteer for us at party conferences, to sort of help them with topic conversations on the various topics. So we've sort of adapted those, and they are now on the website as well. They're called the Brexit briefings, and you'll see there are all sorts of different topics about immigration, about business, about I can't remember. There's about a dozen different themes of it. So they are there, and we'll try and keep them up to date. Obviously, some of them are moving quite fast with the Northern Ireland Protocol happening maybe this week, maybe next week. So there's an awful lot going on, but we will do our best to sort of keep those updated as well. Quite a lot of chat about freedom of movement, about how it would be great for the European movement to be talking positively about it, and trying to sort of shift the conversation about that. So I'm sure that's something that we're wrestling with really at the moment, aren't we?
Yeah. There's more to do there. I also just to add to that, so there is countering people's fear of freedom of movement and starting to shift opinion directly on that issue. But I think what I've talked about in terms of pushing a slightly more positive view of pro-Europeanism, I think there's something to celebrate there as well, about kind of the cultural exchange, the kind of the richness we get from being able to kind of live and work and visit other countries. And actually we need to do some work to just celebrate Europeanness. So one of the things that we're going to be doing this year is kind of a big celebratory piece around Eurovision, and I think that kind of positive messaging about a love of Europe actually goes quite a long way, and we don't want to lose that or forget it. But it's it's easy to sort of descend into the kind of tit for tat of Brexit polarization. Actually, we need to be sort of selling our core values and our love for our continent. So that's what we're going to be doing in Eurovision, and maybe that also contributes to that question about freedom of movement and what the benefit of that is.
Yeah, definitely. So Liz Mills asking, what sort of coverage is the EU getting in national curriculum for England? Very little pre-Brexit. Young people need to be better informed on what it's all for, what they're missing, and how they can be European despite Brexit.
I suspect very little, if anything at all. And I think that was always the issue, wasn't it, in the UK, that we are very poorly served in terms of information about what we've benefited from the EU, and I think that differs quite a lot from the way things are in other countries. So it's a great shame.
Yeah, absolutely. So another question was about the definition of the single market and freedom of movement, on particularly asking for it to be on the website, saying that so many elected politicians have no idea what the single market actually is or what it means.
I think that's a fair point, and we need to be careful of our own jargon. And actually, I think we probably, in our campaigning, we probably won't talk about the single market at all. We're talking about access to European markets. We're talking about a trade relationship. But I think you're right that people also need to know what the technical terms mean. And actually, our honorary vice chair, Richard Corbett, is the knowledge of all things European institutions, and I think he's written a sort of very a basic guide to the EU that probably gives all of those definitions, and we were talking about getting that on the website. So yes, one way or the other we'll do that.
Great. I think we've gone through most of it. I think that was quite a good tour of a lot of topics that relates to the EU. So I think that's pretty much everything that's come up. So thank you very much, Anna. That was a really fantastic session. I'm sure a lot of people will have learned a lot and hopefully be motivated to please join the European movement if you're not already a member. We can drop the sign up link in the chat. But thank you, Anna. I'll see you in the morning.
See you in the morning. Thanks ever so much. It's been really lovely to see you all. And if you do have thoughts about what we should be doing, or if you want specific things out of the European movement, I'm just going to stick my email in the chat before I leave. And it would be great to hear from you. So do drop me a line.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Anna. So yeah, please stick with us. There's a lot of important and interesting projects that are coming up. At Bath for Europe, we are doing another street stall in a couple of weeks, again about the Retained EU Laws Bill. So if you'd like to join us, that will be on Saturday, the 4th of March from 1 until 3 p.m. just at the bottom of Milson Street. So if you've been on our street stalls before, it's usually our regular haunt of where we are. So please join us for a street stall if you have the time on Saturday afternoon to talk about the retained EU law bill. And then on the 25th of March, the National Rejoin March are doing a National Day of Action, and there will be regional events all across the country. Bath for Europe will be planning something. We haven't quite formalised our plans yet, but we will keep you informed of what's going on. But yes, please mark that in your diary. Ruth, you've got your hand up. Hang on, I might have to unmute you. Here we go. Go on, Ruth, you should be able to unmute yourself now if you've got a question.
Yes, well, no, it wasn't a question. It was just to say, if anybody is coming to Bath, to the Bath for Europe stall on the 4th, if you care to come a little bit earlier, from 11 o'clock through until 3, actually, but you could go beforehand, at the Guildhall, we're celebrating World Heritage Day a little bit early, and that'll be quite an international, especially in the European sense, event. So that'd be nice to see some of you there if you'd like to come.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Sounds lovely. So 11 o'clock at the Guildhall, a couple of hours with that event, and then pop along to the street stall and talk about the retained EU law. Yeah. Sounds like a great Saturday for everyone. Brilliant. Well, I think we can wrap up. We're a tiny bit early, but I'm sure everyone's ready for their dinner. Thanks again to Anna Bird. And we will, of course, carry on doing these events as and when we can. So please sign up to our newsletter. You can go to the website, it's bathforeurope.com. And we're also on social media, so Facebook and Twitter as well, to keep up to date with what's happening. So yeah, thank you very much, everybody, for joining. Have a lovely evening, and hopefully we shall see you all again very soon. Thanks, everyone.